Okay, again, a little bit of a tech issue, guys. So we're going to get started again. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's show with our special guest, Mark Olly. I just wanted to say a few words before we get started. And Mark has asked me to relay that you please go and seek him out on Facebook to follow him. Go to Amazon to find all of his books. He did not have the opportunity to say that at the end of the show. So I definitely want to make sure that we get this out there. If you have any questions or comments, he's asked that you redirect them to us here at the Outer Realm at the Outer Realm Contact at gmail.com. Again, the Outer Realm Contact at gmail.com. So without any further ado, we're going to get started. Put your seatbelts on. This is one heck of a show. So here we go. Let me get us started.
Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our pre-recorded show here on the Outer Realm. This is the Wednesday night segment. We are broadcasting via the United Public Radio Network 105.3 FM from beautiful New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have had faith in us from the very beginning, and they've been a part of our journey ever since. So thank you, Folgers. It just wouldn't be the same without you. Big thank you also to Dr. Snick, aka the Sonic Surgeon, Justin Snicker, for his sponsorship and contribution of his music for our intro and outro. And that is his voice you hear. He is an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, and it can be found anywhere that good music can be found. Bandcamp, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon. I could probably go through a whole pile of them, but find him there. And with spooky season coming up, you guys are going to really dig it. This evening, we're going to be on all the regular platforms on YouTube, of course, the Outer Realm, UFO, Paranormal, United Public Radio. That's going to hit over also to the same for Facebook. And of course, news on the flip side, Joe Montaldo, UFO Undercover, Canada's Most Haunted, also United Public Radio, UFO, Paranormal. There's just too many to remember, but the same ones we're usually on, guys. Is where we're going to be. The chat rooms will be open, and Amelia and I will be manning it as always. And of course, you know she's not here with me this evening, and that is because she is not feeling good. Not good to have the bubbles. Not feeling good. Anyway, she will be in chat during the pre-record today also. So we will be popping in some of her questions as they become available. But for those of you guys who will be on your favorite streaming platform, wherever you are, please subscribe or like us up, follow wherever it is you are. Show us some support. If you lack what you're seeing and what you're hearing, please do show that support. It's always appreciated. Now, tonight we've got Mark Olly. I apologize. I'm used to having my compadre do all of this. Anyway, with that being said, this is really going to be amazing. I've just been perusing his stuff here, and it's phenomenal. If you just read what I posted for his new books, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, in a time when the world realized that it was not Immortal, this little book brings an entirely new view of what it means to be human, what the planet really is, and how something as simple as a few grains of sand revolutionized civilization, how extinction is simply a part of nature, and how the whole of life we so comfortably fit into may not be quite what it seems. And just right off the bat, that first paragraph, just had me. But with Mark himself, he was born in Warrington, England, and he went on, it's a really long bio, went on to pursue a solo career as a writer, archaeologist, and television presenter. This career has so far taken him to all parts of the UK, France, Egypt, Norway, Italy, Bulgaria, Cyprus, South America, wow, Turkey, Malta, North Africa, in search of the ancient and the mysterious. I love it. That to me is just like speaks volumes. But I've dabbled, in research in the crystal skulls, and they're fascinating. A lot of people think that they may actually be computers. They allegedly can pick up on, I guess it's whatever the history as of the person that it's come into contact with. Like, that's phenomenal. And allegedly, and of course I'm going to ask Mark to sort of fill us in on that, but allegedly there are 12 or 13 of these things, and some have never been found. So if that's the case, that's pretty amazing. What happens when you find them all is what I'd like to know. And of course we have, some of the most famous skulls, or the most famous skull was is the Mitchell Hedges skull, which was, I think it was 1943 when it basically went to auction for 400 pounds. That's like $18,000 today. I had to write that down because I know I wouldn't remember it. So forgive me for reading it. But it makes you wonder what is it about these things that makes it so fascinating? I mean, we find them all the time, little wee things, people make them. But these apparently, you can tell that there's no way it could have been made by any equipment that we have today. And they're found in obscure places. And there's one that's said to be so far down into the depths of water, through a cave system, that chances of you ever getting to it is probably slim to none. So I don't know. To me, it's pretty interesting. I got Bubbles chiming in. Hold on. We are in private mode from what I'm seeing here, and this is not a thing. She cannot access us. Well, dang, Bubbles. What the heck is that about now? Okay, so I'm going to try to take her comments through, if you're listening, Amelia, I'm going to try to take your comments through Messenger. If it's not even letting me do that, really, I'm just struggling here with everything. So I will see what I can do. I don't want to be rude here, but fortunately, it's kind of the way it's going to go. But here we go. Our guest is here. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi, not too bad.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. I have all of this. We're doing this pre-record, and I'm thinking, okay, my co-host who's not feeling well says, "Oh, I'll just get into chat." But of course, when we pre-record, it goes into private mode because they have to the live show this evening. So what I'm going to do is I don't want to be rude. I'm just going to warn everybody ahead of time. She is listening, and Amelia, I've got the chat open. So if you have questions, I'm just going to forward them from this way. So yes,
okay.
She apologize for not being able to be here for you. And Philip Mantle says, "Make sure you say hello to Mark for me." I says, "All right, I shall." And I'll do it for a few million people.
Say hi to Philip back. He has been missing me of late. We've not really communicated much, but hey, I sent him an email today, so he'll be all right again.
Oh, it's so hard to keep in touch too. I know, the world is busy, schedules get busy, but it was nice. So as soon as he got back to me, he goes, "Make sure you say hello." I says, "I will, I promise." So
he's fabulous. I love Philip to bits.
Yes, there we go. Yeah. So I have to say, I'm extremely fascinated in the topic, and I've dabbled around a little bit with it, researched it before, but I love your take on it. But what I'd
Ah,
like to do is start off with somewhat humble beginnings. How does one just essentially fall into, I think I'm going to talk about all of this stuff and research it, and
yeah.
what was the trigger for you that made you want to research this and write about it?
Yeah, great place to start. Do you want to start there now?
Whatever you like. The
Wherever
stage
we
is
like.
yours. You'll find this is really laid back and we're just going to
Oh
have some
gosh.
fun.
Okay. Well, in the spirit of being laid back, obviously the entire world has been effectively imprisoned for the last, 2.5, 3 years by what's going on.
Right.
And if you get hold of somebody like myself who's archaeologically, creatively minded, that is a really frustrating time. And I know there's a lot of my colleagues felt, what can we do? Can we try and improve the way ahead? Can we leave a message for the way ahead? Can we somehow communicate something that
Right.
is going to pull us up by our bootlaces, quite literally, out of whatever this pandemic, this predicament turns out to be in the long run.
Right.
So I'm sat there twiddling my thumbs, not wondering what to do, and I'm thinking, I've always had this idea that there's so many different kinds of human skulls out there, because I'm sort of into the weird and wonderful. I thought there's so many different kinds. I wonder if I could link them all together to make some sense out of it.
Oh.
And it is without doubt the thing that's in common with all humanity of every kind, of every age, no matter what. We've all got a skull, everybody's got a head. So it works. Well, exactly. Some of us are more, upholstered than others, but that's another consequence of lockdown, by the way. I was really cool. I looked like Johnny Depp when it started. You wouldn't believe what this virus does to people.
It's like, man. Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, out of all of that, I thought, well, I'll do it. I'll write the book. Let's just get on with it. So it's one of those very rare occasions where you can sit down as an author and just go for it. You've got the data, you've built up over many years, you've got the idea. A head is a great thing to hang a hat on. So I'd got the theme and I could just run with it. And quite literally, in fact, I think I've got a copy of it knocking around here. And there's the end result.
There it is. It's also on our Facebook page. And
Philip would never have forgiven me if I hadn't actually waved that in front of the camera. But there you go. So that was the result. I also wanted to produce something that would communicate sort of, how can I put it, major scientific complex discoveries in a way that the ordinary everyday human being can just deal with it, and covering subjects that you're likely to run across. I mean, if you're into what we're into, you'll run across the topics in there on a daily basis, and there's so many different variations of ideas and suggestions and theories. And I mean, I'm a facts man because I'm an archaeologist. If you can't hold it, you can't dig it up, you can't identify it. I struggle a bit with,
and that's hard for a lot of people.
Stuff. It is,
especially academically.
Yeah, it's not an easy discipline to try and stick to. Faith-wise, I'm Gnostic. I'm a Gnostic Christian, so I prefer to, if it quacks like a duck and it looks like a duck, shoot, it's a duck. I'm that kind of approach.
I'm not far behind you there.
Well, there you go. So the book certainly reflects that. There's nothing in there that I don't think people are going to cope with. But there's a whole plethora of wow moments. There's little snippets of information that have been, knocking around on the internet for years. And when you link them all up, you start to think, hang on, we're onto something here. Starts literally with a grain of sand, and it finishes up with lasers writing onto glass discs in 5D. You know what I mean? It's crazy, where the journey takes us. And it's all the same thing. It covers all the same basic topics.
Right.
And here we are.
And here we are.
There you go. That's how we got here.
I know. There's so many places you can go with this because there's a lot of theories when it comes to just, skulls on average. You've got your elongated, you've got, your prehistoric, you've got, modern day. It's they're finding things all the time, which to me is amazing. But obviously, if you're looking at some of these elongated skulls, you're looking at the potential here that we are dealing with beings not well, I won't say not of this world, because it could be dimensional. It could be I mean, we're not the first kick at the can at planet Earth. That's for sure. Right.
Whoa,
So
not by a long shot.
exactly. So we could be looking, at ancestors. But when you're looking, at this possibility of an advanced civilization being here, and you're looking at some of these crystal skulls, some people believe, no, there's nothing on this planet that could have made these, at least not in our time. And some folks believe, oh, maybe there are these mini computers. Well, quartz is like, it can happen, right?
There's about 4 million different questions in that one statement.
I know, it's just like I'm just so excited. It's like, but that's why I always say, like, I just throw a bunch of stuff out there, and I'm just like, okay, you take it. Where do you want to go with all of this first?
Okay, well, the thing with the book is that as you've rightly said, there are many unanswered questions, many mysteries that people assume there is no answer to, and I've got to say that to a point, when you're dealing with ancient archaeology, that is always going to be the case, because most of the remains you're dealing with are turned to stone. So if you're dealing with a piece of stone that happens to look like a monkey skull or a human skull or a rock, you're stuck with the same problem. The best you're ever going to get out of that is some kind of mineral analysis. But when it starts to get to about 50,000 BC, you're starting to get human remains with DNA in. And this is the new science. This is the thing that's really exploding now in a big way. And it's changing the way we look at things.
Yeah.
Just to get a really big elephant out of the room, these like elongated skulls and what have you, they fall into two categories. One of them are copies, if you like, of the real thing that human beings have created themselves, where they've used cradle boarding and other methods to artificially enlarge the skull.
Right.
Which then begs the question, why? And the answer to that is, well, the answer to that is the other side of it. The second category are the naturally bigger genetic human skulls. That category opens a real can of worms, because I've said this in a few interviews now. If you walk into a room, there's a guy sat there, and he happens by chance to have been born with the capabilities of, say, Einstein, but the difference is that his head is 3 times bigger. You've then got a super biological computer that's like 3 Einsteins stacked one on top of another.
Right.
And then supposing there are 10 of them sat in the same room, well, that's the equivalent to a room full of 30 Einsteins. Now, if some guy then walks in and goes, do you know what, I've got a real problem here. I want to know how to build a pyramid. 5 minutes later, written on the back of a piece of bark, will be all the mathematics. Yeah, we've sorted all that out. Yeah, this is what you do. That's how you build a pyramid. And when you look at it like that, and you realize that every continent on planet Earth had a naturally elongated head race of one form or another, all of a sudden the idea of, aliens sticking a 300-ton stone block up a wall at Baalbek, or, aliens building whatever, pyramids all over the planet, etc. All that can just go out of the window, because at the end of the day, it's us. You know what I mean? And in a sense,
I do, yeah.
Processes of extinction, the rats are running the ship at the moment. We are the lowest common denominator of everything that's survived. We're violent, we're destructive, we cause extinctions. Anything that stands in our way, we declare war on it, we fight it, we wipe it out, And the real shame of it is that up to about 500 or 600 years ago, these guys were still alive in South America. The Paracas, they were walking around with these enormous heads. Some of them are even 4 times the size of ours. Super intelligent human beings that must have known. I mean, imagine the memory capacity. Imagine what they were capable of remembering, what they were capable of working out, what they were capable of, actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And they were with us up to around about Elizabethan times. You got Queen Elizabeth over here in the UK. You've got Columbus, landing over in South America, but that's another story.
Don't get me started.
Kind. But you've got all of those things going on, and what we're seeing really there is it's the end of the ancient world that's been there for tens of thousands of years, and it's the arrival of the new world, which eventually, in my opinion anyway, kind of culminates in the Industrial Revolution and what we see there. But the shame of it is that in the process of creating the new world, we've utterly destroyed and lost the old world. Does it have to be aliens? Well, The answer is no. Actually, it doesn't. You know, it could just as well be us. You know,
It could be. It could be. You know, I mean, it could be. Like I said, we're not the first kick of the can. You know, there were
oh, no.
advanced civilizations here. We're here, like you say, like we're the problem kids in the schoolyard. You know, we don't get along with anybody. We just can't. You know, we're judgmental. We destructive.
Well, if you start to back it up in
Right.
terms of real history, you know, if these guys with the big heads were still around, say, 500 years ago,
Mhm.
then if you backwind again, say, 1500 years, there's a good possibility that you'd have still had little Homo floresiensis, like the Hobbit people would still have been alive. You
Mhm.
probably would still have had sort of the dying off of various other species. The
Right.
hairy man of Mandalay would have still been there, and lots of other of them. If you
Right.
backwind then a little bit further, go to 1500 BC, so
Right.
3,500 years ago, then you've got
Right.
this thing in the Bible about the giants. You've got David and Goliath and all that sort of thing going on.
Right.
Backwind a little bit further, start to look at your archaeology again and all that. You're going back in sort of, you know, leaps of a few thousand years. So
Mhm.
go back 10,000 years,
Mhm.
and the human species could potentially have been as diverse as, say, cats or dogs, you know, or
Right.
whatever. I mean, going with cats, you know, you cross a
Right.
line as a tiger, you'll get a liger, which is a giant, enormous thing. And yet the smallest cat in the world, the palm cat, will literally sit in the palm of your hand. It's tiny. Well, human beings are exactly the same if you think about it logically.
Mhm.
All species were like that. We had giants all the way down to
It's true.
tiny
Yes.
creatures, you know. So why
Yes.
should we be any different? We live on the same planet. We play by the same rules, you know. You've only got to go back a short way. But then when you start going back in the longer term, this is when your head starts to explode, or my head starts to explode, because then you've got things like, well, okay, so what about if the flood was real? You know, then you're looking at 10,000, maybe 15,000 BC.
Right.
Atlantis goes down, you lose all your super civilizations. But then
Mhm.
the entire of the Gulf of Mexico is a meteorite crater. That's supposedly the dinosaur killer. You know, so like 160 million years ago, if you go by their
Mhm.
time scale,
Mhm.
160 million years ago, bang, the entire planet was wiped out completely by that. And then it
Mhm.
started again. So we're almost like a reboot. But then
Mhm.
that's not the biggest crater. The biggest one is under Antarctica. They've only recently found it, the US Geological Survey. They
Yes.
penetrated the ice. There's one under there that's 4 times the size of the Gulf of Mexico.
That's
Now,
crazy.
it is. That's big enough for it to be the bit that chipped off the moon. You know, if you go down that route, if the
Right.
moon is like a lump of earth rock that broke away, that one on
Right.
Antarctica is big enough to do that. So the further back you go, and you think, well, you've got all the little, you know, tsunamis, volcanic
Mhm.
eruptions, asteroids. You know, you've got all the bits in between, and
Mhm.
it's an ever decreasing number of elements, if you like, that's getting
Right.
smaller and smaller. So as soon
Right.
as you get your head around the idea that actually, you know, literally we are the rats that are running what's left of the ship, you know, when you get that sort of idea, you think, well, it's not so crazy to try and imagine just
Mhm.
how incredible life must have been in
Mhm.
those past golden ages, you know.
Oh,
Um,
where
wow.
people were, yeah, we're brilliant. So, you know, back in the day when people were really brilliant, I was like,
Yeah, when we
it's
used
like,
to be what we were
woo.
supposed to be in the first place, yeah, as opposed to what we are now.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, I mean, there's some of them out there. It's like some of them made it through the cracks. But I do have questions. I will start off with Amelia's got a couple here, and then we've got somebody else watching that I've sent a private link to. So,
Fabulous.
okay, so she wants to know, do we know or have we found an elongated skull that is longer than some of the others that have been found? That's the first part of the question,
Okay.
and then I can go into the other one.
Okay,
Um,
well, I'll answer that one because that's relatively simple. The
okay.
biggest one that I've ever seen was it was in a book about wonders of the world, and I think the overarching editor of the book was
Mhm.
none other than Eric von Daniken. I think it's in one of von Daniken's books,
Right,
and
right.
it's a straightforward, you know, shot on Kodak film, shot of one in a storeroom. But you look at this thing, and like I say, 3.5, possibly 4 times the capacity of a normal skull. You can see that just by looking at the photo. It's nothing
Mhm.
amazing. It's just in one of these throwaway, you know, mysteries of the world books. But for size, I've
Mhm.
certainly never seen one as big as the one that Eric photographed. But then going on a much broader scale, looking at what's coming up on the internet now, that's not unique. You know, that's
Right.
one of several that are in that
That's
category
been found.
of supersize. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she's she goes, "Wow, holy chickens! How did they hold her head up?"
Well,
Sorry.
well, let me just throw one in here, a quick one, because you can tell the difference between the sort of copied skulls and the genetic ones.
Right.
The genetic ones don't conform to the same structure as human skulls. They have
That's right.
much smaller joints at the back, which are much further back. They don't have the same sutures.
That's
The
right.
cheekbones, the eye sockets are in different positions. This is not something you can do artificially. It has to be done genetically. So
Right.
very recently, that was a really big plus point to saying, you know, these guys are not the same as us. They are essentially a different species. But go on,
Yeah.
crack on.
No, I love it. I love it. It just shows that, you know, we're not the only fish in the pond sort of thing. The second part of her question was, would elongated skulls determine rank in race, or were they pretty much all the same if it applies?
Well, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Going sideways, there was an archaeological study done of a lot of the skulls in the Americas that were elongated, and they were asking the question, well, you know, why would you bother to copy them? Why go
Right.
to all the trouble of trying to stretch a normal human skull or stretch a baby skull? What's the point? And it went back to status. And that's true also in Russia. It's true in Europe. You had somebody, you owned somebody as a slave, or you
Right.
had somebody in a position of authority with that giant head, then they obviously had some advantage that was
Right.
worthy of being copied. So the answer
Right.
is, in effect, yes. If you've got a super head, you're a super person. You know, you're
Right.
a superhuman being.
There we go. And of course, do we know? I'm sure by now, yes, we do know that they've been DNA tested to the
Yes.
best that they can be, and
I
they
wouldn't
have. It
necessarily
has
say
been
to the best.
determined, yeah, that it's
Yeah, they've
being
done a reasonably good job of it, but there's stuff coming out of South America now. The DNA testing, what have you, is really only just getting underway. So I'd
right.
expect to see an awful lot more coming out of South America. And
Right.
certain other species, like the hairy people of Mandalay and Homo floresiensis and the Denisovans and one or two of the others,
Oh, the Denisovans, yeah. Oh,
far from
yes.
complete. You know, it's not a finished job by a long means.
Mm.
My book really is a starting point. It's an introduction. It gets you into this.
Right.
But the journey's only just beginning. You know, it's the first couple of rungs on a very long ladder.
Oh, it's you know, I've researched all of that, and you know, for one of the other shows that I do here on the network, with Joe Montaldo, and the Denisovans are, that's relatively, like, people are really digging
Yeah,
into it because they're finding phenomenal things. But
yeah,
there's other civilizations being found everywhere. It's like
yeah.
the planet is giving up her secrets, and you know, academia is going, what the hell are we going to do with this?
Well,
Not
I
what
had a,
we have
I
in
had
the
a feeling
plan.
when I put the book out, I had a feeling people were going to start reading it and thinking, "Oh, this is a load of rubbish." This, you know what I mean? It's some guy that's gone nuts under lockdown. You know, it's just this is
Yeah,
crazy. But in actual fact, the opposite has happened since the book has actually come out.
right.
There's more and more and more people coming out the woodwork now, going, "Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what it is." You know, it was a Lord of the Rings type world back there. You know, and
An
all
awakening.
flooding. You know, it's flooding out now.
It's
You
become an
know.
awakening. I love it. I love it. Well, Wayne has a question. He says, do you think an advanced race like that of Atlantis, for example, made the skulls so they could encode their histories? So I'm going to guess through evolution, so that it could be resurrected at some point. Oh, he's talking about the skulls.
It's
Okay.
crystals. Yeah,
Skulls.
yeah.
Could be resurrected at some point in the future.
Okay, well, I didn't pick you up because you mentioned crystal skulls earlier on, so I didn't pick up the subject of the crystal side of it.
Yeah.
The skulls are a bit of a mystery because there are very, very few of them that
Mhm.
have got secure archaeological backgrounds, if you like.
Mhm.
There's one in a ballpark in Kobe that is undoubtedly as old as the ballpark, so it's 800, 900 years old. There's one
Right.
that's about 1,000 years old that's been found close to Mexico City fairly recently, but they're keeping that very, very close to the chest because they're fed up with them getting pinched. People just keep removing them from the country. I've got one which is about 4 or 5, maybe 600 years old. And it
Mhm.
appears that the ones we've got now are the ones that were sort of saved, in inverted commas, by invaders, by Europeans, by the Spanish, etc. Actual genuine archaeological old ones, if I put the Mitchell Hedges Skull of Doom in there, mainly because that's just the production standard of that is breathtaking. So I think that one's genuine. If I put that one in there, you're only talking about maybe 4 or 5 or 6 skulls in the world that we can say are genuine. They tried to bring them all together in the 1970s because they had this idea, and it was very much like a mind, body, spirit, spiritual thing. We'll get them all together and they'll all talk to each other and they'll all light up and turn blue like they do in the movies, and there'll be a massive exchange of information, and humanity will be, much better for it afterwards. And actually, they did bring quite a lot of them together. I think they managed to get 13 of them together, and absolutely nothing happened. So everybody was like, well, what a load of rubbish, until over here, one of the big universities thought that silica, crystal, quartz silica, is basically glass. That's what it is. So these things are made of natural, superheated, superformed silica glass quartz.
Interesting. So not such crystal.
Well, and they thought, I wonder if we can use this to write on. So they started mucking about with lasers, and they've now got it. It's in Nature magazine. They can write now into glass discs using a laser. They can write in 5D. Two of these discs, which are only the size of the palm of your hand, they think will hold the entire information that humanity currently possesses.
Oh gosh.
On 2 discs the size of the palm of your hand. And if they survive like quartz, you're talking about 35 million years before these start to degrade. So all of a sudden now you're into science. It's not spirituality or made up stuff. It's proper science. Now, this is the crux of this one, though. At the end of the day, if they did encode information into quartz, we don't know how they did it, so we don't know how to get it back out. Okay, so nobody's actually stuck one of these things in front of one of these laser readers and had a go. Personally, I'd love to do it, and I'd like to be the first one there, and I'd love to see what happens. But at the end of the day, because we don't know how the information got in there, we don't know how to get it back out. But it doesn't mean that it's not there.
That's it may be a matter of using. Like, first, I'll back up a minute. I'm amazed they found all 13, because there was one they spoke about that they believed was so far into the depths of water down in a cave system that they didn't think they would ever be able to retrieve it. So I read that at one point, and I was like, well, that'll put you in a pickle if you're trying to bring them all together. But from what you're saying, maybe there's more.
There are more. There's a lot more than just the ones they had in the 1970s. Yeah, there's a lot more.
And then there's the belief that if you can get them all together, that it's supposed to do something, planetary. It's supposed to be something really spectacular. Maybe that's when the information is released. Because otherwise, the only thing I could think of is you would have to maybe go to the spiritual side, use a medium that is really good with being able to handle an object and maybe have a transference of energy. Has anyone ever tried anything like that?
Well, again, this is where it gets really interesting, because we're looking at the qualities of quartz, and there are 2 things that are important there. The first thing is, if we can do it optically, if we can fire light, if you like, into these crystals and then be able to read stuff back, then the question is, were they capable of doing the same thing in ages gone by, given that they were actually more superior and more intelligent than us? And the answer is probably yes. That would answer that. We just haven't done it yet. Excuse me. And the idea that someone can pick one of these skulls up and get a register of some kind off it, that, believe it or not, is scientific as well, because quartz is electrical. If you squash it and you crush it, it'll pulse back, and it powers things like quartz wristwatches. There's a huge electrical charge inside there. The reason for that is, believe it or not, that when they came to try and work out why quartz behaved the way it did, it led them ultimately to look at why planet Earth is the way it is, why quartz is the #1 most common substance on planet Earth, etc. And this is a real shocker. This is the wow factor. They thought, I wonder what would happen if we took this idea that the Earth's core is iron and just got rid of the iron because it doesn't work anyway. It creates a paradox called Olson's paradox. So nothing works. Gravity, electric, the spin of it, everything just fails with iron. Eventually they had to go and they thought, well, why not quartz? Let's have a go at quartz. So they put quartz in there, and guess what? It works. So at the end of the day, the entire planet, the whole of planet Earth, is an enormous quartz ball spinning through space. We live on it, quite literally. You know, even down to the fact that they think the actual core now is amethyst. That's the type of quartz they think it is. They're down to looking at the impurities that makes it function. So
that's interesting.
You know, it's incredible. What consequences does that produce? Because if you're stood there holding a piece of quartz and you can feel it coursing through your body and you're capable of, you know, getting the full effect from that crystal, that's because you're actually standing in it as well. You're actually stood on quartz, literally. You know,
that's an amplifier. That's a store of energy.
And another twist as well, in the human body, the bit that really needs quartz when you're developing as a child inside the mother's womb, the bit that you need quartz for, quartz silica, believe it or not, and this is absolutely medically true, is for the development of the brain. So you've got a ball of quartz that you're holding, you're stood on a planet made of quartz, and the bit of you that's got more quartz in it than anywhere else is your brain. Which again makes you think, well, hang on a minute, how did they know that? Because they made skulls.
Which is, and then the next question, why are they shaped like skulls? I think this is the answer.
Well, there you go, you see. And when you start, this is what I said at the beginning, when you start to get your ducks in line, you know, when you start to look at these subjects, you line them all up. I know the information's coming from lots of different sources, but when you start to look at it, it all starts to make sense. And what I'm doing, I don't think I've rediscovered it. I don't think I've discovered anything. I think I've rediscovered it. I think what I'm putting in the book is something that, you know, maybe was commonplace in Atlantis. Maybe the Atlanteans knew about it. They knew the properties of light and electricity and magnetism and quartz and where it went in the body and how the planet functioned. All those things are information that has been lost and scattered. And all I've done is just brought it all back together again. You know, that's what I think the book does.
It's fascinating. I think people have been fascinated with this topic. I mean, for as long as these things have existed, you know, you even just look at the folklore of it. Oh, when the Great Flood happened, you know, legend is the 13 skulls were saved on an ark that rescued people. The flood subsided, they were spread out throughout the world. Maybe it was, but I think that's the whole allure of it is. It's not just so much the knowledge that they may contain, it's who made them and what knowledge were they trying to save. You know, is it similar to what we're doing with the discs?
Yeah, I mean, even if you were to just regard the idea of a crystal skull or the image of a crystal skull, take for example the one in the ballpark in Cobra. It's flat and it's set flat into the ground, but it's white quartz. So if you just take that as an image, you know, as a logo or a brand, or, you know, as a hieroglyph, then in understanding it visually, you know, as a created image, it is going to start you down a certain path. So it is almost like they left breadcrumbs behind. You know, I think they must have been fully aware of the fact they weren't going to survive to live into the 21st century. I mean, what was going on in South America seems to show, especially with the Paracas, that they fully appreciated that the end was nigh. You know, it was, you know, the conquistadors were technologically superior to them. They brought all kinds of things with them: smallpox, chickenpox, flu, you name it. And I think they kind of sat there. They all got together one day and just said, look, we've had it. We're doomed. What can we do? What can we leave behind that will, you know, get the human race back on track, if you like, and tell them what they need to know? And the skulls, I think, are part of that. They're part of what got left behind. And as you say, I mean, if they were here then, it meant they survived the flood. They survived the ark. You know, they survived all these catastrophes to still be with us now. We still have organic human remains in the deserts of Peru that we can dig up. You know, we can come literally face to face with these guys, even though they're not living and breathing at the moment, you know.
Well, so how far back are we talking here with the creation of these things? You're
Well,
going
like
South
I say,
America.
the oldest.
Are we talking 5,000 years? Are we talking 10, 15, 30 million? What are we talking?
Well, this is where it gets interesting for me, because you've
Right.
got the Paracas essentially and other races in other parts of the world, and they all seem to be, there's always the last of something. You always end up with the last of whatever before it goes extinct, white
Mm.
rhino, panda, whatever. You always end up with the last one, and scattered all over the world there are the last of these guys with the enormous heads, and they're all disappearing, if you like. They're all dying out round about the same time. They seem to all be coming to an end between 800 and 600 years ago. Guess where all the skulls come from? They all come from about
That
800
time.
years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize that they were relatively, I
Yeah.
guess, babies on the grand scheme of our
Well, the ones
evolution.
we can get dates for, because back to
Right.
the archaeology again, the ones we can actually date. I
Right.
personally reckon that the oldest is about 1,000 years.
Okay, that's really, that
So
makes it even more interesting, because that makes it doable.
yeah, it's like a postcard. They're sending us a
Right,
postcard. They're
right,
saying, look at this. Pay attention. This is important. This is something that you need to be looking at. It could even
right.
be our future. And I think that's what they're doing within these skulls. I mean, there's probably somebody out there that can prove me wrong. I'm sure there are archaeologists in
Mhm.
South America that, can produce skulls and say, well, this is 1,200 or 1,400 or 1,600 or whatever. But I up to now, I've not really been convinced there's anything older than about 1,000 years. But that's
Right.
still a long time.
It is. I guess, as on the grand scheme of things, you think something that's so difficult to like, you think to yourself, no, there's no way this thing could have been manufactured. There's no way that, we have the machines that can do it now with lasers. They didn't have it. It's like people just aren't thinking back that sometimes, our ancestors did have their own
Yeah.
techniques.
Well, I've got a feeling there's a book coming, because I've got this idea that,
Oh, I like that.
what happens if you
Right.
put all the bits that we know about back together again? Because in a
Right.
sense, because of evolutionary theory and things like that, we've
Yes,
tended to
yes.
assume that everything is, disappearing from the past because things are getting better. But what happens if you kind of throw that in the dustbin and just go, okay, what did we actually have? What was around in the past? Well, if you've got some guys who are 35 foot tall and they're enormous, you're not going to have trouble moving stone blocks.
This is
Problem
true.
solved.
This
I
is
mean,
true.
I saw a movie the other day. I think it was Gods of Egypt, and they're actually building
Yes.
pyramids
Yeah, I love
using
it.
they're using woolly rhinos to drag the blocks. Well, that
Which is
actually that is
brilliant.
historically correct. The
Yes,
woolly rhinos didn't die out until Egypt died out. They were
that's true.
completely different parts of the world. But when you
Right.
start to put all these different elements together, you begin to think, oh, hang on a minute. It's not what we can see, it's what we can't see.
Right.
It's the way these things came together and the way they interacted. That's what we're missing.
Mhm.
I met Eric von Daniken at a conference actually a few weeks
No,
ago,
he's
and
brilliant, brilliant man.
I chatted to him and I said,
Mm.
Chariots of the Gods. I said, it doesn't matter. I said, whether that book was right or wrong. I said, when it came out, it made us all stop and think. I said, at the end of the day, we were looking at things in a completely different way
Mhm.
to the way we'd done before. It removed our assumptions. And he kind of looked at me and went, there are 267 question marks in that book. That's all he
Okay,
said.
who counted those?
Well, he did, because he wrote it, obviously.
Right.
But
I'm just like,
at the end of the
wow,
day,
that's phenomenal.
that was the point. That was why he
Yes,
wrote it. Was to,
yes.
and when we start to question things that have been around in the past, it actually
Right.
starts to make sense.
Mhm.
Yes, of course they could build pyramids, because they did.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
How they did it, that's what we're not seeing. This is where we need to sort of plow into it. And
Well, you have researchers who delve into, no, this is what it was for. No, this is
yeah,
what it was for. They all have viable information, like their perspectives. We had a
yeah,
gentleman on the show talks about them being a giant water pump,
yeah,
and
yeah.
using water to
To
do
raise the
everything,
blocks
get the
into the
blocks
center of the
up.
pyramid. Yeah,
And
that's quite plausible.
oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
they're like, no, we've proven this with theories and blah blah blah. I'm like, it's
yeah, yeah.
fascinating. Then of course you have your theorists are like, no, it was extraterrestrials, but other theorists are like, or were humans emulating ships that they've seen, because there are three-dimensional triangular ships out there. Was this what they're emulating? Being a god should be buried in this. If you're from the stars, maybe you're a god. Like, you could go around in circles and lose your bloody mind trying to figure it out. I've been to the Great Pyramids. I've
So
spent time in them.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and the whole, we go back to the 70s now, the whole pyramid power thing, like the energy,
Yeah.
people get transformed in these things.
Yes, they do. Yeah, you can sharpen razor blades in there. Meat stays
Yes.
preserved and doesn't rot.
Yes.
I actually went into the King's Chamber with a number of people with traditional musical instruments. So we had drums, we had flutes, we had sistrum, bells, various other things. And what we actually discovered, which I still to this day don't think anybody else has tried it, is the 7 chambers that are above the King's Chamber inside the structure.
Right.
They all act as resonance chambers, resonating. They cause whatever you put in at the bottom ends up getting bigger the more of these chambers it echoes through. So what you end up doing is, if you sat in there in pitch black playing musical instruments, which we did, everything disappears. It's very hard to comprehend that you sat on a floor. You just end up floating in space. It's I can't really describe it, because I've got no reference, but the audio side of it, the sound side of it. Paul Devereaux did a whole thing on archaeoacoustics and what have you at prehistoric sites. He needs to get loose in the King's Chamber. I'll tell you that there's something going on in there,
yes,
acoustically.
there is. Yeah, I've known people who've had phenomenal experiences in there.
But then when you link it all up, when you look electrical, light, the spiritual belief of what, going off to Sirius, the acoustics,
resonance,
preservation, magnetism.
But stone resonates and it absorbs, right? Like, if you think about it, there's a place in the United States that they have different stones out. It's in a forest by a river, and they play the stones like xylophones, and they all have different tones. And we had a friend on, Sean Williamson. He's actually in the UK, and he's a stone sculptor. Like, it's a dying trade, and he's done unbelievable things for a lot of restores cathedrals, things like that. He said an experiment was done in one of the cathedrals with the stones, and they were able to pick up all the residual, like voices and stuff going back hundreds, if not thousands of years in the existence of this. It shows you that stone will absorb it and will project it. So it's not strange to me when you say, we went in and did this thing, because I've been in that chamber, and I could see how just the design of it, how that would resonate and just go through the entire structure.
I mean, that feeds off then into the idea that they could levitate stone. I mean, even in the Arthurian legends, Merlin levitates stones, which, if you can do it using sound, then all of a sudden you don't need a 30-foot tall giant bloke that's going to physically move them. Just you fly them in. Just if they knew things about sound that we no longer know, then who knows what they could have been capable of doing. It's possible. Speaking of recording, I'll share with you an interesting story that kind of illustrates this idea of being able to read things. There's a group of archaeologists in France who came up with this idea. They were looking at Roman pottery, just the usual thing that archaeologists do. We tend to study pottery because it's useful for dating and things like that. But they were studying this particular Roman pot, and it was relatively complete. And they noticed that what the potter had done was, as the pot was spinning on the wheel, he'd actually run a stylus down it, one of these metal things, just to put like a nice finish on the surface of the pot. So it had, this wonderful fine spiral going all the way down it. And one guy said, I wonder what would happen if we turned it sideways on and put a record player stylus on it. Now, you know where this is going, don't you?
I do.
They did it. They put the stylus on the beginning of this. And the recording that came back, so they recorded it, you can hear in the background people in the streets and animals and the noises in his workshop. And halfway down the pot, this lad goes running past outside shouting something in Latin. and you can hear him in the background.
That is amazing.
And that, I mean, most people don't even know that was done. That's going back about 15 years. And they've done dozens of different pots and plates and pieces of pottery since then. And they've discovered that actually it's reasonably common that noise will get picked up by the stylus of the potter. So, I mean, how amazing is that? You're listening to some kid, you know, screaming in Latin down the street.
From how many thousands of years ago?
1800, 1900, 2000 years ago, you know.
That is crazy. That's crazy. And that's like clay. Like that's not even.
Well, the early recordings were done on wax discs and into celluloid. So it's as long as it's a hard baked substance, you can get something back off it. So again, that raises questions about what is recorded in other things around us, not just quartz crystal and all the rest of it, but other stone. A lot of the guys that deal with ghosts and apparitions, they've noticed a lot of these things are turning up in areas where the building materials are high in quartz.
Yes.
So is it a replay? You know, are we seeing that coming back?
Big time, big time. I think even if a location is built over a great amount of quartz or limestone, running water, even, you know, like rivers going underground, it's just, things just resonate and it just hangs, it gets trapped in there. I've seen it, like I say a million times, I've seen it hundreds of times where you go to a location, you think, oh, this is something, you realize, no, this is an imprint.
Yeah, it's like said earlier on about bringing together different disciplines and different ideas, different things that normally perhaps you wouldn't connect. When you know that the earth is quartz and you know it's electrical and you understand the properties of quartz, and then you go to somewhere, I know there's one or two places in America where this happens, where if you take your car's handbrake off, it'll go uphill because the magnetism and the gravity is all screwed there, so it doesn't, you know, do what it's supposed to do. Well, if the same thing as that, but in different forms, is happening on haunted sites, you know, if that makes your hair stand on end so you feel creepy, or it triggers off a replay from the quartz around you, etc. These are all different disciplines. They're all different, you know. One lot's the scientists, the other lot are the ghostbusters, you know, the other guys are looking at planet Earth and gravity, you know, and a couple of electricians in there for good measure, you know. Get all of them together, and then you're beginning to get close to what the solution to this is and where it could take us, and you know what's happening. I think that was probably the strongest point with people like Tesla. Tesla had no limits. You know, he didn't care where he got his information from. He was just interested in what he could do with it and whether it worked or not. You know, a true inventor. So there must be lots of others over the years. Maybe Einstein, maybe one or two others who, you know, Stephen Hawking even, who are generalists. You know, they're taking their information from everywhere. So that's something I try and be. I try and cast as broad a net as I possibly can.
Well, I think you do it with the means that you have. You know, you take Nikola Tesla as an example. He had the mind to construct different things. That's how his mind worked. I can construct this to make it like this, you know. And then you have yourself. It's like, you know, in a literary sort of way, you can dissect it and you can put it down to paper, which is realistically how most of us all, you know, this is how we all resonate with it, because we can read it, we can absorb it. You know, it's some people just, that you can't make your brain work in a way to dissect it. Then you get those who are the other way. Wayne has a question. He goes, with reference to the pots and the stylus, do you think it was done intentionally, or was it a byproduct, sort of an accidental byproduct of making a decoration on the side of the pot?
Creating it was an accident, but reading it was deliberate. That's the simple answer to that one. I don't think they had any kind of concept that iron stylus would record into clay. I don't think they knew about that.
Unless you're super advanced, like Atlantis. I could see Atlantis.
I could see them recording stuff in the past. But I mean, we know, for example, that they wrote things, they painted things, they designed things, you know, they decorated caves, they did all sorts of things creatively. They were constantly churning things out. But combining what we were just talking about with that question, I think in the past that they fundamentally thought in a different way to the way we do now. I used to do talks in junior schools, and if you've ever talked to like real juniors, like infants, 4, 5, 6-year-olds,
Right.
they're absolutely fantastic because they take no prisoners. They'll just tell you how it is. That's that.
That's true.
So I used to say to them, okay, anybody out there know how to spell shoe? And they'd all go, SHOW, SHOE, SHOO, they'd come out with all these SCHEW, all these, you could end up with 10, 20, 30 different ways of spelling the word shoe. And then I'd just hold up a picture of a shoe. And every single person in that room, doesn't matter what the culture is, where they come from, doesn't matter, they would know that was the picture of a shoe. Now, when we're looking at things in the past, especially things like hieroglyphs, pictograms, and what have you, that I think is the primary way that people thought in the past. They weren't really interested in making marks and writing, not till the advent of cuneiform. They weren't interested in trying to secretly hide things and codify things and all this. It was almost the opposite. What they wanted to do was literally stick up a bill hoarding, like a whopping great big spread of hieroglyphs, and everyone could just walk in and go, yeah, that's the sun, that's Emperor so-and-so, that's Queen so-and-so, that's a river, that's a bird, and once you get to grips with that, yes, there are other concepts hiding behind that as well. It sounds really simple, but the symbol for the sun is a circle.
Yes, right.
But then that's the symbol for God. It's the symbol for creation. It's a spiritual concept. It rises, it sets, it's life and death. It represents bronze making because, bronze burns like a golden circle. So you've got all the stuff that goes with, the Bronze Age and worship of copper, and by the time you finish, you could literally write a book half the size of the Bible about a circle.
It's true. It's true. But
and that's where these guys were at. That's
right.
That's only 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And nowadays we think we're really clever because there are 10 million different formats on a laptop. What possible use is that?
No,
it's just frustrating. I hate computer technology. It's apart from the fact that it's silicon based as well. I'm communicating with you now on an object that essentially functions because
it's
of glass.
True from the other side of the pond. Yeah, I should be visiting friends, and I can do this in person.
Yeah, you imagine what we're doing
friends
now.
And family in the UK, I know.
Without sand, without quartz crystals, without quartz silica, we wouldn't be able to do this. So when you start to get around that and you start to appreciate that, the guys in the past were just as clever as us, if not more so, then you start to think, wow, what is it we've lost? What are we not seeing? What's not there? What questions do we need to ask that we're not asking? Which essentially is where the book goes, back to the book.
The quartz thing, is always fascinating to me because it enhances so much. Even people who research into the paranormal, supernatural, use a device like it's a spirit communication device. Works on AM radio frequencies, things like that. But what's interesting to me is they're designed. Proper ones are designed, and I shouldn't say. I don't keep up with the technology, so don't shoot me, people. Just saying, but. Some people will put in quartz crystal within the design of the item, the box itself. And the ones that I have owned, because I like to experiment with everything, the ones that I have owned have had the crystals, and those that just didn't perform the same. So it's one of those things. It's like, maybe it comes back to how it resonates, how it can draw in energy. Like it's fascinating. But I find your take on this with respects to what are we not asking? When you said, how do we know they're not using woolly, rhinos to help lug this in the pyramids? You think to yourself, why wouldn't I have thought of that? I never in a million years would have thought of that. And I'm a pretty I'm a heavy duty researcher, and I delve and cross-reference things like as much as I possibly can. I never would have thought of that. Not in a moment would I thought of that.
It's probably because I started off as an archaeologist when I was one of those nasty little brats that were in junior school. I think I was about 7 or 8 when I started. So, I've been at it a hugely long time.
Right.
And over that period of time, it gives you an appreciation of in some cases, you can tell when somebody's making something up. You can tell when something's real.
Right.
You can tell when something physically exists and when it doesn't. I mean, I'm almost down to the point now where I can spot fakes online. If something pops up online, you just know whether it's right or wrong. I don't know what it is. It's just an instinct. So in my case, I've veered off down this avenue that only a few others have.
Right.
And this is where I've ended up. I've ended up with a slightly different worldview and a slightly different way of looking at things. And like I said at the beginning, stick me in a house for 2.5 years, and you're going to get something weird out at the end of it, which is what the book is.
Exactly. I love it.
It's the result of that. So, but yeah, I mean, if we use what we know to try and achieve what we can, but don't do it in a kind of an elitist way. If we share that knowledge with others, and I think we're going to move forward like the clappers. I mean, at the end of the day, the internet, which has only really developed since the 1970s, this is an enormous tool for good. There's so much we can find out and research through this. It's also, by the way, a tool for bad as well. You can't rely on things like Wikipedia and that, because people they put all sorts of things on it.
The internet, unfortunately, is what articles that are written by people. You're really relying a lot on people's perceptions of their perception of what is going down. But I always look for papers that have been written by academics and such when I am trying to research something. I love books too.
As a general observation, I would just say for people in general,
right,
keep your brain switched on and be particularly aware of contradictions. I mean, the one that springs to mind, and it's in the conclusion of the book, actually, in a different form. But the one that springs to mind is, firing a spaceship to the moon. Great. Yeah, what a fabulous idea. But they didn't take into account the fact that the two Van Allen belts are so full of debris that it would just slash any vehicle to shreds before it ever got out of the gravitational field. So you can't switch your brain off. You can't turn your brain off and go, yeah, they fired this tin can full of gadgets, at something that's so many million miles away and got away with it. No, they didn't. And even if they got outside the Van Allen belt, they would have been microwaved or fried anyway by the sun's radiation. So you look at something like that and you think, well, hang on a minute, that's common sense. You can't take what you're looking at necessarily on face value. Now, that doesn't mean that there might not be other ways to get around those problems. I'm not totally ruling out the idea that, somebody living on another planet 100 million miles away can just zap its way across to us, because they might be dealing with a different dimension, or they might be working in the light frequencies. It might be a non-physical thing. But, did they land on the moon in the 1960s? Well, I watched it on telly because I was alive then. And no, I didn't even as a tiny little monstrous kid in kindergarten, I didn't believe it. I was just like,
that's not a thing.
This is a great movie. This is really good. It looks really fabulous,
Right. I know. And even when a kid goes, I sort of wonder.
Well, normally it's the kids that spot these things, because people come out with these fabulous, statements. And like, in the beginning there was a big bang and it made all of creation. And the first thing a kid's going to say is, yeah, but what was it that exploded?
It's true. They're just pure, they're untouched by logic or by the rhetoric of life, so they can ask those things. I've got a child like that, and when he was little, as an adult now, we always used to look at him and say, "What are you, a lawyer?" Because he'd be 3 years old, and you'd say, "What color's the sky?" And you'd say blue, but he'd want the real answer.
Yeah.
Really. Okay,
really.
Well, it reflects on the water. Blah blah blah. Well, why is the water blue? Well, maybe it reflects.
We should always encourage. We should encourage the kids to be like that. I mean, at the end of the day, they're our future. So yeah.
That's your future scientists, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the book ends. The book basically ends, Crystal Skulls ends with this positive message to say to people, at the end of the day, at the moment, billions and billions of people on planet Earth are never going to get off this rock. Space to us is irrelevant. We're never going to get that close to being able to do what a very, very small number of human beings do. It doesn't really affect us. So we're down here and we have to sort of get on with it. So let's make the best of it. That's kind of the message at the end of the book, if you like. Yes, it's great to theorize and look at all these things and what have you, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but at the end of the day, it's about what we can do here. So in a way, I mean, this interview's gone full circle now, because you're back to, shoot it's a duck, you're back to bricks and mortar, you're back to, what can we physically interact with and deal with. And, if we spent imagine if we spent the same amount of money going down to the bottom of the ocean as we've spent firing things out into space.
Say it all the time.
Why are we not doing things like that? We should have probes going down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, not firing it at somewhere like Mars, which at the end of the day just looks like a desert in Mongolia. You can't live in that desert. You're not going to be able to live on Mars either. So what a waste. Great movie, and it keeps everybody happy. But at the end of the day,
I don't understand why we're trying to colonize, like something in space, when if we took care of our own planet, we wouldn't need to colonize. And if we did spend more money on exploration, we've tapped into such a small part of this planet. The water is I think that's the key. I mean,
some people actually think that water is a living entity. They actually think the entire planet, it's the Gaia principle, that the whole planet itself is a living organism, and that water is, if you like, the surface living entity, that it's all one. And the more that science is looking at that, the more that's starting to look plausible, because we're at the stage now where we know that trees talk to each other through the roots. They communicate with each other. So here we are sitting here thinking, hey, we're the top of the evolutionary tree. We're little gods and we're in charge of everything. And the rest of the planet must be really laughing at us. Everything else on planet Earth's having a big belly laugh.
It's all alive.
At our expense.
All alive. Captain Paul Watson, who founded the Sea Shepherd, has done the show a couple of times. And the one thing he said, I can't stress enough for people to understand, was if the oceans die, we die.
That's it. Yeah.
It goes, it really is that simple. And it's always, I mean, common sense would tell you that.
Yeah.
But this is what I don't think people realize. If the oceans die, we die.
It's also equally true of the botanists, because they've made the point that once the trees are gone, then the planet has no lungs. And once you've got no lungs, your atmosphere is screwed and you're going to get, microwaved anyway. So all the different elements, what we need to appreciate is that the Earth, the planet, is actually absolutely 100% perfect. And we just need to stop cocking it up, which I think the guys with the super heads, the really intelligent stretch head guys, they would have said exactly the same thing. They would have had enough capacity and enough intelligence and enough memory to be able to appreciate perhaps exactly what the planet was in ways that we just don't get. That's as I said earlier on, we're a bit barbaric. We're like wiping out the opposition. We don't cooperate, we dominate. That's probably the best thing to come out of the green movement, might be that at the end of the day we actually start to cooperate with the planet that we live on.
Right.
And these guys with the superheads would have known that. They would automatically have been able to do that. When you look at the technology, for example, of South America, you look at what they were doing out there, the way they were growing food and the buildings they were creating. And, satellites now are starting to show up just how vast the Aztec and Mayan Empire was. You're talking millions and millions of people living in jungle. And they didn't go around trying to wipe out all the crocodiles or wipe out all the big cats, or they all made it work. They actually made that work. Same thing through Egypt.
Yes.
They sent an infrared satellite over Egypt, and I think it was they reckon there was about somewhere between 100 and 300,000 inhabitants of Egypt. Now the estimate is something like 3.6 million at its height, because there isn't a spot of Egypt that hasn't got something on it put there by humans. It's all under sand, which just goes to show, I guess, what happens if you get it wrong. Yeah,
I think when it comes to researching, Amelia's got some comments. Basically, when it comes to researching the water, she goes, it's almost like they're afraid to think about it because they're polluting it. Let's face it. She also states we need to go back to the 70s and use glass, less packaging. Cruise ships should be limited. I agree with all that, and
Yeah.
never mind what the military is doing with testing and sonar and what it's doing to wildlife.
Everything that the Romans used. I mean, we know this as archaeologists. Everything, the leather,
Yes.
the cloth, the pottery, the wood,
Yes.
the glass, all of that goes
Yes.
back to Earth. All of it.
Right.
All of it just gets absorbed back.
Right.
What we're doing now is we're mucking about with things that don't, so a lot of the metal work we're producing now we'll never get rid of it. The radiation that we're creating, through radioactivity and what we're doing, it won't go. The pollution won't disappear. Plastic won't vanish.
No.
So we're doing the opposite of what the guys with the enormous heads would have done. We're taking the same resources and the same assets that we have here and not using them right. We're just not doing it the way that we should be doing it. So she's absolutely bang on, absolutely spot on. We need to have a different worldview of what we're doing with what we've got here.
But we're so intent on moving forward that I think, what the obvious is we need to go backwards with some things. But again, you move forward with technology, you look to the stars. I interview, oh my God, I've been doing this for like a couple of decades, and so many people from all walks of life, different theories. And with the outer realm, we have had all kinds of people on who we deem to be, at the top of their fields of what they're researching. Thank you. And, you have some folks that, getting into the whole extraterrestrial things. That's really big right now because the government's had their disclosure, things like that. And, they're like, well, there are bases in the water, they've been in the water, they've been in our caverns. The Hopi Indian people talked about this. It's part of their oral history, beings from underground. Like, the point I'm making is we have been living with other cultures probably the entire time, but we're still tunnel vision. Let's go to space and look for aliens, and we're going to colonize this and this. And we're thinking, but they're already here.
Well, so it is an interesting one for you. You're going to like this.
Okay.
I've just got something come up on my screen. It's gone. One of the things I put forward in the book, which is quite interesting, is supposing in the past that the focus of one of these cultures was on something entirely different to the focus we've got. So let's say, for example, they decide they're going to focus solely on time and space.
Right.
So you're probably going back beyond Atlantis now, back to the very beginning. There's a culture, and they go, right, we're going to try, and we're going to, crack this problem of time and space. I've got this thing coming up again I can't get rid of. Hold on. Got rid of it.
Don't you know I'm doing a show? Knock it off.
Yeah, I don't want to know about an update. It's probably because I'm about to say this. Actually, it might be some alien force coming in and causing chaos. But anyway, let's suppose that they actually did succeed in solving the problem of time and space, something that Einstein wrestled with. Lots of people wrestle with it, and they end up with the ability to time travel. Now, what I propose in the book is, where would you go if you had the ability to time travel? Well, you would not do anything that was going to damage your own existence. You wouldn't try to create a paradox.
Correct.
So going part way through or going back to the beginning is a bad idea, because yes, you can go and have a look, but you're going to mess it up if you interfere. The place you can go is to the end. You can go over to the end and see where everything ends up. You can go and have a look. And that's probably more or less where I'd want to go. I'd want to say, right, where is all this going? Where's it leading? What's coming? What's going on down at the end? So I think what we're seeing, these guys with we're back to the funny shaped heads again, back to the greys. Right. I think you're seeing one of those very early civilizations who've cracked this problem of time and space, coming to our time to try and find out where we end up and what the hell's going on, which then explains why they're abducting people, why you've got cattle mutilations, why they won't interfere, but they appear all over the place. They don't seem to give a damn whether we see them or not. They're just not bothered by all of that. I think it will trigger off a change, and I think we will find out who and what they are in time. But I think we're in for a shock because, like you say, I think they were here all along. I kind of agree. I think they probably are another version of us. They're just a different version of us. Maybe, 100 million years ago, they fell into another dimension.
Well, what
and
about
they've just decided
years ahead?
now's the time to
they're us in the future.
Well, that's the paradox, you see. If it was them coming back from the future and they interfered in their own past,
Right.
they could actually annihilate themselves. They could alter things in such a way that it would interfere with them. So in order to get rid of that complexity and that paradox, that problem, it's got to be that they end up at the end. They can't go back to the beginning, because that doesn't work. Everything falls apart, unless they're just going to have a look. But clearly they're not just coming to have a look, because clearly they're interfering. They're actually appearing. The other thing is, I mean, I've done a lot of work with the ufologists and the UFO people. Philip, as a published the book, is he's a
very well respected,
very well respected chappie, and I've worked with quite a lot of them. And over the course of doing that, I've actually handled pieces of crashed UFOs, unidentified flying objects. I've got a piece actually in my office. I've got a tiny little fragment of one that came down in Wales. And while the material is highly advanced, I mean, it's duralumin, and there's a couple of other bits in there that can't be
found
identified.
Here on this planet?
Yeah, crashed on this planet. So you're talking Roswell. I actually have a piece of Europe's Roswell. I've got it sat in the other room. I'm not the only one. I mean, the crash recovery team all ended up with bits of it. So they physically exist. I know, because I've handled one and worked with the people that have handled one. I know they physically exist. So I have no trouble at all in saying that, yes, there are things that are popping in and out of our dimension. They're obviously alien to us. There are things happening that are beyond what we can understand. And we, again, back to broadening your outlook, broadening your horizons, looking wider. But I think we're going to have a bit of a shock, because, at some point, one of these little grey guys with the enormous heads is going to come wandering out, shake our hands, because they physically exist. I think they're physically there. They're not. I believe that as well. They're not just a belief system. In other words, they're not like ghosts. They don't just appear and disappear. There's a hell of a lot more going on. I love that scene in Men in Black, when he's in the laboratory and he touches that ball and it goes zipping all around the room, and there's just all this technology that we've got no idea what it is. I think they're trying to tell us something in that film. I think they've got a lot of stuff.
I think there's a lot of films that do. The Matrix is being a big one as well.
Loads of them. You
start watching things with a bit different perspective. You're sort of like,
I think it's a circle, because in a sense you talk about ancient aliens, but the ancient aliens are alien to us, but at the same time could very well be us. And maybe this is the generation where that will join back up. The aliens from way back are going to join up with us, and
here's a twist. Here's a twist. When you talk about Roswell and Amelia has a comment I'll get to in a moment too. The twist is reverse engineering. False flags, reverse engineering. Is it possible, that Roswell was reverse engineering? Was it possible that with a lot of the sightings that we see apparently could be reverse engineering our military, our governments worldwide? I'm not centering anybody out, because I don't need any more hate mail, but I'm just saying,
I struggle a little bit with the reverse engineering thing, because as an archaeologist, I've studied a lot of, cultures and entire empires, and people will know that things don't just appear complete, functional, in every respect. They don't just come out of nowhere. So even if we reversed engineered the UFO that came down, where did the UFO come from? Because that craft in itself would have had to have been complete.
You would have had something that came down at some point. I there's that theory that a lot of what we see in the skies right now are our own, humanity, not so much just ET. Just you get people who have had contact, and the way they describe things, you're just like, ET, I don't think would need to build like this. But I mean, it makes sense. I mean, cultures have been emulating what they've been seeing for thousands of years. We're not going to be any different. However, in the direction that we've gone in, we do have the technology to destroy us.
Yes,
as a whole. And here we are starting over again. So it's are they coming in from the future saying, hello, you've been here before,
There's a better way. That'd be their message. There's a better way.
There's a better way. I would think so. Amelia saying, do you believe cattle mutilations are extraterrestrials and not maybe us, military, governments of the world?
in my years of looking at this, I mean, I saw a flying saucer UFO in the 1970s, fairly close up. I lived between Manchester and Liverpool in the UK. Manchester and Liverpool, you know, I mean, Winter Hill's a hot spot. We've got loads of military stuff up here.
You do.
All kinds of stuff going on. You know, it's probably more here, in fact, than London, you know, because we're out in the sticks. So there's loads of stuff going on all the time. And there was a lot of sightings of what were known as the black triangles. It went worldwide. They're basically black triangles with a big light in the middle and 3 small lights on the outer edges. Right through the 1990s, you know, there were literally thousands of people seeing these black triangles going at vast speeds, enormous speeds over the hills. And then all of a sudden the military came out and went, yeah, it was us. We were testing a spy plane out of Manchester Airport. Now, that's like 10 years of serious UFO study, photographs, witnesses, all the rest of it, gone. Because at the end of the day, that was us. So I totally get what she's saying about maybe there is just a possibility that all of a sudden, you know, somebody's going to come out and go, well, yeah, you know, we were doing a science experiment.
If you're trying to create a false flag and instill fear into you know, like they want you to fear ET, I could see that. There's big money in military, right? It's a big war. The war machine generates a lot of money.
If people think these things are alien, they're not going to worry about what the military's doing if they think they're aliens. So that's the great cover story, isn't it? That's been around since Roswell.
I agree. I think the war machine is a money-making machine at the same time, but you need to be at war with someone. You need to be defending from someone.
Well, here's another thing as well. If you can keep something a secret, so let's suppose Roswell, let's go military and say that's the consequences of what came out of the Second World War. So rather than it just appearing out of nowhere, the craft that came down was actually something that was developed by the Germans during the Second World War. And then, you know, we go from there. Well, we know about that. We know about flying saucers. We know about all the stuff that's been disclosed and released. The question is, what have they got now that we don't know about? Because the Second World War was a long time ago. You're talking 70 years. What can we as the human race develop with all that time, all that effort, all that money, all the space, all the secrecy, everything? What could we develop in 70 years? Because if it comes out, if all of a sudden whatever we developed appears, it is definitely going to look alien. You know, people are not going to know what they're dealing with because
it's true. Yeah, they haven't seen anything. You know, well, I mean, I think the militaries of the world are keeping their arsenal fairly up to date. But you're right. There are some things that go flying around. You're like, where did I just see? What was that? You know?
I'm convinced of it. I mean, I can tell you a story. For better or for worse, I've never told anybody on camera this before, but you'll like it. I had a friend that was, he joined the military. He was working in one of the military bases over here. I won't say which one. I can't give his name away either, but you get the idea. And what he decided to do one day, crazy guy, he's on a military terminal, so he decides he's going to hack the Vatican Library. So he's like, you know, Vatican, you know. Anyway, he managed to get into the Vatican Library, got through the entrance portal or whatever it was, and he got locked out in about 30 seconds. He never got past any of the Jesuit passwords or any of that. But what he did accidentally stumble across was another link to an airbase within this country. So he thought, oh, this is interesting. Let's go and see what I can find over here. So this is in his lunch hour, basically. So in his lunch hour, he goes off and has a look online in the 1980s or whatever, early days of computing, at whatever it is they've got at this airbase, which turns out to be a UFO in a hangar. That's what he sees. He sees a UFO parked in an aircraft hangar at a military base in this country. And that's, what, 30 years, 40 years ago? So was it one of theirs or was it one of ours?
Yes.
But it was there. You know, he saw it. And then he got locked out.
It didn't take long, right? Oh, we have a breach.
Yeah.
But that's what I find. a lot of whistleblowers are coming out. I mean, we've had a lot of military people come on the show throughout the last few years, and all of a sudden it's just like blurp. And you're just like, aren't you worried about just actually blurping that right now in front of like 2 or 3 million people? Like,
Yeah,
that's going to be a real costly blurp. And
yeah,
but
yeah,
but it's like, no, no. Now we're allowed to talk about it, and now people are writing books,
yeah,
and
yeah,
even right down to like UFO sightings in World War I and World War II.
yeah, yeah.
There were even UFO sightings in the Civil War in the United States.
What
And
what I find interesting as an archaeologist is that there's a kind of a rule in history. You're going to like this.
yes,
That what you don't do is you can't destroy somebody's reputation or destroy somebody's livelihood
right,
while they're still alive. So
right,
what happens is, as generations pass, as
yes,
people disappear, and you
right,
start to lose them, then it becomes possible then to discuss matters that you previously couldn't discuss, which in this case is really noticeable because all of those people in the 1950s and 60s who were
mm,
there when all this began, the
mhm.
vast majority of them, if not all of them now, are gone. They're not
Well,
there anymore.
a
They've
lot of
all
these are
disappeared.
deathbed confessions.
And you've got a
Mhm.
lot of those as well. But what's
Yeah,
happening now is the authors and the researchers now don't
right,
have to worry about doing any damage to those people because they're
right,
gone. So
right,
that
right,
rule is still applying. They're still using this 50, 60, 70-year rule, which is
right.
holding all the information up. The worst part of that is that what we're getting now, a lot of what's coming out now, is going to be information relating to the 60s, the 70s,
Right.
years ago. It doesn't really truly reflect where we're at
Today.
now. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
you're not going to
I
get
can
somebody, for
completely see
example,
that.
blurting out, what the military are doing with graphene, or what the latest policy is on, invisibility cloaking, and all this kind of. They won't tell you about
Yeah.
any of that.
Or
It's
the
out there.
aircraft that's hidden at the Vatican, right, Amelia? So she says, yeah, for sure they got something. It's like,
I
yeah.
think from an industrial point of view, it would not surprise me at all if the Catholics have got a finger in every pie on planet Earth, because they've been there 2,000 years. They've had plenty of time to get involved with everything.
Oh,
But I would only think that a very small number of people within the Vatican are actually privileged to know
to know it.
enough about what's going on, to know all of it. And again, I joke about the Vatican Library, but the Vatican Library is it's not secret at all. The
Right.
problem actually they've got is just the fact they've got more material in there than 300 scholars could sort out in 100
The
years.
Library of Alexandria, hello, who burned that crap down and got all the
Oh, it's
good
burnt
stuff.
down 3 times. You can blame 3 people for that. The first ones
Okay.
that burnt it down, I think, were the Romans. The next ones were the Christians, and the
Right.
last ones were the Muslims. And they've
Yes.
burnt the scrolls in bread ovens.
Every single time you get a bunch of squirrely squirrels,
Squirrels?
right? Squirrels. Everything just keeps disappearing. But you look at everything that's been lost. But we know the Vatican's got a good chunk of stuff.
Yeah,
Where
they have.
else is everything? Museums of the world, perhaps?
Well, practically speaking, the Library at Alexandria, I think, taught us a lesson, because everything from the ancient world got shipped into there, and then it
Yes.
got wiped out. So
Right.
there's a lesson in that. The
Right.
World Wide Web and computers and all the rest of
Sure.
it. Do not put your faith in technology, because one decent sized solar flare, wham, it's gone.
There it
You know,
goes. I know. That would
Pack
be,
everything up. So the way to view the
yes.
Vatican Library, in a way, is that it is the greatest physical backing up of
Right.
data that there's ever been.
Right.
The last 2,000 years almost would cease to exist if that
That's
library ceased to exist.
it's true. It's true.
That's not to say there's not some really fishy content in there, because I would
We know
imagine
there is.
there'll be
We
plenty
know
of
there's
stuff in
fishy
there.
stuff in there.
I mean, I shouldn't really tell you this, but I'm writing a book at the moment, and I'm going back through lost scrolls
Right.
and lost gospels,
Ooh.
because that's been a hobby of mine for years. I mean,
Well, you have to come on the show and talk to us
well, I
about
will do.
that.
I've been tinkering with it since the 1970s, so I'm writing that. I've just finished a book on King Arthur as well, so I'm looking for a publisher. If anyone out there fancies publishing the best book on King Arthur ever written, according to John Matthews, if you fancy publishing it, it's ready to go. 470
Yeah,
pages.
would love that too.
Well,
Definitely.
it's only took 44 years to write. It's taken.
So we know it's going to be good. Well,
Oh,
you
it's
know
a
what? You get that
humdinger.
going, and you are, you have an open door here on
Well,
the
I'm just
Outer
going to say, it's ready to go now. All you need to do is just send me the address of a publisher, and I'll just press send. Off it goes.
Nice and easy.
It's literally, it's got a cover, it's got photographs, it's all
Oh,
laid
fella.
out,
Come on
ready
now.
to go. Well, yeah, give Philip a nudge, because I said to him, you know,
I'll
do you
give him a
fancy
nudge.
doing this? And,
I want this
well,
on my show. It needs to be published. Let's go. Philip, if you're
well,
listening.
I mean,
if
in
you're
all
gonna be
fairness to
listening.
Philip, he said, well, I do flying saucers, I do UFOs, you know, I don't do King Arthur. But at
Right.
the end of the day, it's all mysteries, you know, it's all.
It's very mysterious, because people, it's like, no, it doesn't even exist. Oh, sure in hell it did, but it's just not like you think it did.
Well, imagine what my Arthur book's going to be, very matter of fact. Same with all this stuff that I'm getting from places like the Vatican Library and that.
Right.
The research I'm doing, I'm getting all kinds of different things that basically were brushed under the carpet in the early days of Christianity and Constantine.
Right.
So, you know, it's going to be fascinating.
I may know publisher. I don't know if he'll take it or not, but I can connect you. He's also been a guest on the show, so I can.
Fabulous! You know,
I will definitely. I will let you know on that.
Put us together. Yeah,
I will
send the emails across.
I will definitely do that. But I have to do a very quick station ID and sponsor ID. So you guys are listening to The Outer Realm. We are broadcasting on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee, who have been a part of our journey since day one. Thank you, Folgers. Big thank you to Justin Snicker, aka Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music. He is responsible for the intro and the outro that you guys hear. We are here with our special guest, author Mark Olly. His topics are, of course, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, his book. And we're talking about all kinds of things, UFOs. You know, and I just love the mysteries of everything.
I did warn you, actually. I said that we were going to digress. I said we'd be off like the clappers, you know, like.
No,
like
I love it.
Squirrels, you know.
No, I know. Forget the squirrels.
Yeah,
that's just my squirrely brain. But no, I do. I love this. I love this because it's people don't realize, as a researcher myself, and the things that I've delved into. There's so much that we have absolutely no idea. And I want to use the Arthur thing for a moment, because this will be, you know, all you publishers out there who are going to be listening tonight. It is a big mystery. People just have absolutely, you have your romantics who are like, yeah, Arthur and Guinevere, you want to believe it. And then you have your academics like, absolutely not. Then you have those of us who sit there and go, no, maybe it's rewording, reframing, but definitely this was a person. There are things that are surfacing throughout, you know, different civilizations. And you look at England, is rich with folklore, with history, mysteries for sure. You know, but why is it, like, again, let's talk Noah's Ark, just because, you know, there have been 2 locations that they believe that this thing has landed, but nobody knows for sure. Ark of the Covenant, nobody knows for sure, but yet they don't have to see it to think, of course it existed. Why is it different with the legend of King Arthur, do you think?
Okay, well, I can tell you where the Ark is, and I can tell you where Noah's Ark is. I know where they are. They physically exist. You know, one's on the Turkish border, not far from Ararat, and it's a huge shape in the ground. It was discovered by Ron Wyatt.
Right. But what about the
1980s.
one in the mountains? They found
the one in the mountains. Not sufficient evidence for that one, I have to say. I know it was discovered by a chap that was a former spaceman. What was it? It was Armstrong.
There's videos of them being inside there, and then all of a sudden the official said, no, you can't go there anymore.
Yeah, I've seen those. I'm not 100% convinced. As an archaeologist, the Ron Wyatt one on the Turkish border, that
seems to be the
sits better with me, far better, because there are little things in there that only an archaeologist would know. Okay, so you're not looking for a huge wooden. You're not looking for a wooden shed stuck up in halfway up a mountain.
But if it's a big flood, you might be up there. You may land up in those mountains.
What you're actually looking for is things like dinosaur poo. That's what you'd expect to find in the Ark, and they've got fossilized dinosaur poo in the Ark down on the Turkish border, but not in the one that's up the mountain. So it's little things like that that kind of give it away.
And you see, now we're kind of going back full circle to, you wouldn't think about that sort of thing, because you're so used to seeing images of giraffes and lions. It should have been dinos.
If it was alive after the Ark, then it was on the Ark. That's the bottom line. I could do your whole interview just on Noah's Ark. The Ark of the Covenant is at Axum in Ethiopia. That's
And you
where
think
that
that's
one is.
100%?
I'm
100%?
I'm 99% convinced, mainly because I've actually got a copy of it sat about 20 foot away from me in there, that was made by hand in Ethiopia by the Ethiopians about 600 years ago. So I'm fairly au fait with that one. Where was I going? King Arthur, back to Arthur again. I took the same approach with Arthur. It was an interesting quote. There's a guy called Gildas that, or was it Nennius? Hang on, no, it's Gildas. Gildas was a Welsh chronicler, and he wrote the life story of King Arthur. And then Arthur went and killed Gildas's brother in an argument. So Gildas took the book he'd written about the life of Arthur and threw it in the river. So the life of Arthur just went, out with the tide. And what I thought was, I'll do it. I'll write the life of King Arthur. I'll try to get all the evidence I can, all the archaeology I can, all the history that I can. I'll try and make sense of it. I'll put it together in chronological order. And somebody actually said to me back in the 1970s, they said, you're wasting your time. You'll never get that. That'll never happen. You'll never do it. And excuse me. Anyway, here we are, 2022, and it's 477 pages long. So I think I probably nailed it. And it's all there.
I'm looking forward to it. I think we'll have to bring you on again, even like before that, because I am interested in talking about the whole Noah's Ark thing, the Ark of the Covenant thing as well.
Just broadly speaking, call it biblical mysteries.
Yeah,
just throw them at me, because that's something else I do.
There's tons. Have you seen the photographs? There was a man in the 80s who was on an excavation in, the Holy City. I think like there's a whole lot to do with where they think the city of David was, or the palace was, and such. Yeah. And he found an opening near the Temple Mount, not far from it. And he took photographs of what looks like the Ark of the Covenant. It's all like sort of disheveled and in a corner underground. And he applied to excavate it and was denied. And it's been sealed up.
That was exactly the same fellow that found Noah's Ark in Turkey. It was an Australian archaeologist called Ron Wyatt. And what he was doing, he was looking down the crack over which Christ was supposed
and he climbed partly into there, didn't he?
What he found actually were ossuaries, which are Jewish burial boxes. They're bone boxes.
Interesting.
Which do turn up quite regularly in that part of the world, in Jerusalem, what have you. And the reason that they stopped him from excavating is because he literally wanted it to be the Ark of the Covenant. And from the experts in Jerusalem were looking at it going, I'm sorry, mate, that's not the Ark of the Covenant. It's a bones box, it's an ossuary.
It looks very compelling when you see like images of it.
But you see, this is I guess this is the professional side of it. Is where I can, as an archaeologist, I can look at something and I can go, yeah, I know what that is. I can tell you what that is. And I was aware that Ron had done that. That was actually shortly before he died. It was a shame because he passed away never having excavated that crevice, and it was left to his son. And the authorities, generally speaking, didn't get on with his son in the same way that they got on with Ron. Ron always managed to get permission because he was the older guy and he knew what he was doing. And I've got some amazing video footage of things that he's found over the years.
I love it. I love it.
Well, that's an entire night's program just in itself.
No, like seriously, we'll do it.
Biblical mysteries. Go for it.
You get 2 hours to just have fun with it. No, you know what? When we're going to do this, if it works for you, let's do it in December.
Hey, do a Christmas special.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, we're going to do that. I'm going to send you some dates when we're done, because I think that would be spectacular. And the Arthur thing is a no-brainer for wanting to do that also. That seems like a huge endeavor. Okay, a couple of a question and comments. Amelia says, curious as to your thoughts on Thor, Loki, and Odin, fact or fiction? I think folklore for me, but what are your thoughts on that?
I'm just going to go I'm going to stay on topic, but go sideways with this one. People forget that the Vikings are in the Christian era. They're not just like partly in the Christian era, they're firmly in the
Yes.
Christian era. So you're
Yes.
talking about 600, 700, 800 AD. They didn't actually die out till about 1460, I think is the date on the Icelandic sagas.
Right.
So people look at the Vikings and they go, oh, they're ancient, ancient European culture, this, that, and the other. No, they're not. They're actually medieval. They are a medieval pagan culture that
Right.
was very, very heavily influenced by Christianity early on. There's a king called Rollo that you need to go and
That's
have a
right.
look at.
Yeah,
And he
I know
was a
Rollo.
convert or die Christian, either you
Yeah,
converted
yeah.
or you died,
His
which is
family.
fairly
Yeah.
typical of the Vikings,
Yeah.
And the reason I know all this is that that's where the Holy Grail comes from. Well, that's another story. Graal
That's
is a
all
Viking,
part of my
it's a Viking
lineage.
word. It's a
Rollo.
Viking word,
Yeah.
Graal, Sangraal. So it's
Sangria.
an earlier.
Yes.
It's an earlier thing. We can cover that on another one. But
Get
staying
me
on
started.
topic,
There's another
well,
night.
staying on topic, just
Right.
so all these gods and later deities they're either Christianized pagan deities or they're pagan deities that have been derived from earlier forms. So, like the idea of Odin hanging on a tree, to get wisdom and losing the use of his eye, and
Metaphor.
yeah, there's overtones there that the world tree could well be the same as the cross.
Right.
There's a lot of crossover there in imagery
Right.
and in their approach. I'm not saying that the vast amount of it's not separate, because it is. It's a separate pagan tradition, but you've just got to bear in mind that people. I mean, you reeled off quite a few gods there: Loki, there's Freya, there's
Yes.
Odin, etc. We know more about those gods from the Icelandic sagas that were written down in the 13 and 1400s than
But
we
this
do.
goes back. You're talking Rollo. He was like 850.
He
William
is.
the Conqueror, 1050. Like that goes pre-medieval.
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, William the Conqueror is like the start of the medieval stuff, really. That's early med. But we don't have any writings, really, proper writings from the days of Rollo. We've got history, but we don't have very many legends. We don't have many of the sagas left from that. But there's a lot of sagas that they start really with the Normans. But then so does all the Arthurian stuff as well.
Yes.
You would not believe the crossover that there is there.
I can't
Nobody
wait.
seems to bother.
I cannot wait. Yeah.
They all go, oh, guess what? Arthur's a medieval thing. It starts with William of Malmesbury and Geoffrey of Monmouth. And I'm like, hang on a minute. They're Normans.
Exactly.
You're talking about Vikings. So actually it starts with the Vikings,
Right.
So how many people out there have written a book? Oh, the Viking King Arthur. Well, the answer's nobody, because nobody looks. So that's one of the aspects of the book that I've written. I pick up the Dark Ages. How did the Saxons view him? What did the Vikings
Roman
think
times
of him?
too, though, doesn't it?
Well, once you start getting past
Because there's
Geoffrey
that
of Monmouth,
whole theory in there too, right? So
the modern stuff, as I call it, which is 1,000 years old. The modern stuff does not do Arthur justice at all. The bits we have that survive from before that, the majority of which are Welsh, much better. And the same thing is true. Back to the question, the same thing is true of the Viking gods and goddesses. A lot of what we see is a later development, and I mean a lot later. 400, 500, 600, 700 years after, and it's got that Norman polish. The same. PR polish job that they did with Arthur. They did the same thing to all of their characters. So if you're gonna look at Viking sagas, you're gonna look at the gods and whatnot. Try and go for something as early as you can get.
I love that. I
definitely.
love that. Next comment from Wayne, I guess is a question. He goes, we're going back to the arc here. So I have to go back a little bit because I wanted to keep going with you. Because it takes a lot longer to fossilize wood into stone. Would not the arc have disintegrated totally rather than turning into stone?
The answer to that might have been yes, except for the fact that it's made of gopher wood. Now, gopher wood is a prehistoric type of bound reeds, so it's not made from wood. It's actually made from grass. And the one that's preserved, which is the one in Turkey, looks like it was constructed using gopher wood, which is these bundles of reeds, prehistoric timber, and metal plates. So when you look at the construction of it, and you start to look at it in terms of prehistoric Egyptian style boats, which is what it would have been, that one fits. The one that looks like an enormous box hanging out the side of, the frozen top of Mount Ararat, that's Hollywood. That's total Hollywood. Nobody has ever recorded in prehistory building a boat like that.
Right.
You'd be talking about that kind of Atlantean era. You're talking about 7, 8, 9, 10,000 BC. So
Yeah, that thing. I mean, there's videos. I've seen videos of people inside of it.
Yeah.
And the construction of it. I guess their theory behind it all is like how high was the water? Could it have settled up there? Because you're still all within the same area. You've got one on the mountain and one pretty much down at the bottom.
Well,
but not, that's
if you get the book that Ron wrote, because he's doing it as an archaeologist, Ron Wyatt. If you get the book that he wrote, which I've got somewhere, and I think it's just called Noah's Ark.
Yes.
If you get hold of that, it's not just about the boat. What he does is he can actually go right across, I think it's 3 miles of land, and he can show you where they drop the anchors, where they drop the
anchor stones are there. Yes.
To slow the boat right down.
That's
and
crazy.
then the boat itself got hit by mud and twisted. It got twisted into a strange position. And then the mud replaces the reeds. So in effect, all the grass is petrified and it is all turned to a solid material.
Which makes sense.
But it's
the anchor stones are key.
The way that you'd expect it. Well, the anchor, they're a major key. These things called coprolites as well, which is fossilized dinosaur poo that you find inside the boat. That's another clincher. And then the structure conforms exactly to the measurements that are given in the other flood stories from around the world. Just taking the biblical one, it corresponds in measurements to the biblical flood almost exactly. But I mean, in the Bible, I think it's got 7 decks, but the Babylonian Ark has 15. And, there's about 80 stories. I think there's 88 flood stories in all from around the world. And the Ark tends to differ in all of them. But at no point in any of them is it ever described as a wooden box. Just never.
Yes, I know. It makes you wonder then, what is it? It's something.
If it's actually there, this is the other thing as well.
The satellite images of it.
Well, you can only get to it apparently when the ice retreats, when it thaws. So there's only been a very small number of people that have actually got there. And I have heard of samples being taken from the one that's up on the frozen Ararat, but I've never seen any of the results. Whereas with the one that Ron's got, there's scientific papers written on it. There's stacks and stacks.
Because it's accessible. See, that's something else that makes me wonder. You're still dealing with the same government, essentially, the same country, right? So why would they allow, well, if we are, because I heard it was the Turkish government that said, no, you can't go up on the mountain to explore this. They halted that. But if they're the ones that are saying that have control over the one below, why would they would give you access to either?
Yeah, and not let somebody go to the other. Well, the answer is the other one, the one they're not letting them go to, is probably not there, or it's an environmental threat to the top of the mountain, or there's something.
I can see that.
Yeah, there's something going on there where the government itself are not convinced that that's the real deal.
Or they just don't want you there for whatever reason. I always sort of look at both sides of the coin when it comes to things like that. Not just because of what they think it is, but just because, well, what is it and why don't you want it? Maybe it's not so logical. Maybe they are, let's face it, ancients. This can go back to, to prehistory. It could go back to, may not be at all what we think it is. It could be something just as substantial.
Well, you're going to love this and hate this at the same time in equal measure, because biblical stuff, Arthurian stuff, all that kind of stuff, anything that has any kind of sacred relevance or is, important religiously or spiritually. There was this thing that they used to do in the past where they would have the real thing and then they would set up a fake and they would send everybody to the fake. And when you think about it, that makes perfect sense, because if you happen to know where the Ark of the Covenant is, you don't want somebody to trample that flat and pull it apart, or sack it or destroy it. If you know where, Noah's Ark is, you don't want that to happen there either. You don't want your sacred sites necessarily to be destroyed. But at the same time, through the ages, people have left, a breadcrumb trail of where the real things are. You've just got to dig harder, push through. So there is the possibility that, I don't know, maybe they did the thing up on top of the mountain as a thing to try and get some kind of publicity backing for it, to say, look, we found it, it's stuck up the mountain, nobody can get to it, but I'll tell you what, you guys, the American team, you can have the exclusive on this, off you go. And then everybody's gone, yeah, that's it, that's where it is, all the rest are fakes. which
Right.
then draws the attention away from the real one, which is the one Ron found.
Right.
Because to be honest with you, there has been a huge amount of damage done to the discoveries that Ron made. He thought he'd
It's a
actually,
tourist place now, which doesn't help
yeah,
because everybody can walk around all over it.
yeah.
So,
Sooner or later, as human beings, like I say, we've got a habit of wrecking things. So, in the past, they tried to mitigate against that.
yes. Well, it's like anything. It's why, they've closed down certain tombs in the Valley of the Kings. They've,
Yeah.
limited access. We
Yeah.
cause damage, not even necessarily intentionally, but it's just from a high traffic of people,
Yeah.
But for me, I feel that a lot is going to be exposed.
Yeah.
You have those who know about it, who feel maybe the world isn't ready for it. You have those who are actively seeking it. Um, this reminds me a little bit. We have some friends from the UK, Carl Cooks and Hamilton White, who they literally own what's called the Tomar Hoard, which is a Knights Templar hoard. I guess when the
Yep.
Inquisition came into Portugal, it was 10 years in finding this and bringing it together. It's all been connected to the Holy Land, and now it's going to be, I guess they've announced on the show last week, it's going to go to a museum. It has just never before been seen. But in doing that, my question was, and this is going to be my question to you as well, like, this is going on display, and it's a huge responsibility to own something like that. This is privately owned, right? And it's going to go on tour. They have a degree of control how they want to, see this being treated. So there isn't the concerns that you would have with something like a location.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher. You always have people who are looking to obscure things. I have to have this piece of it. And look at Amelia. See, Amelia and I share a brain. How do you think they can preserve the Ark? How could you take something like that? I mean, they're doing it with monuments all over the world and ancient civilizations. You look at Greece, how much stuff's been damaged there as well. From
it's happening
allowing
everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
England, the same. Even with Stonehenge, they've sort of like, okay, put the brakes on. We're limiting this. Do you think that they can preserve it to a point where that people can go and safely see it?
Wow. The biggest responsibility professionally that archaeologists have taken on in recent times is making sure that no matter what it is, we have a record of some kind of it. So primarily recording it is of utmost importance now. Getting photographs, measurements, 3D scans, laser images, plots, whatever, get the reports out, get things recorded. So that, as archaeologists, that has now become probably 60 or 70% of what we do. We don't just end up spending the whole time, with a butty box and a trowel, down a hole. We don't do that. It's the preservation side of it. Technologically as well, we're now advanced enough to be able to preserve most objects.
Mm-hmm.
When I say most objects, there are still some objects out there that are out of our league. I'll just give you an example. Supposing I knew where Excalibur was. Supposing I just went and fished it out the bottom of the lake, you know what I mean? Well, as an archaeologist, even if it was made of gold, you could just end up with a pile of pieces of metal, that just fall apart and disintegrate.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you do now, the consideration to what you find and what you've got has to be given. I'm massively interested in the Templars as well, but you could include that. Does include that as part of the biblical subjects, broadly, because they are connected with that. So I'll try not to go down that route too much. I won't go off base.
Oh, it's a fascinating topic,
But include that as being broadly biblical, because we can go down that route then.
Of course.
So there are Templar artifacts out there. I've got a couple. I've got a cross and one or two other bits and bobs that are Templar. And preserving them, looking after them and recording them, that's kind of the primary thing. If they've gone to a museum, I would guess that it's probably because the actual physical owners don't know or don't have the technology or the finances to go the next step and actually preserve them.
Oh, they do. They're fully preserved. They're fully they're beautiful. I mean,
Well,
they've
that's
had
I was gonna-
archaeologists from Jerusalem. I mean, they've all been examined. This is all being done through proper channels, working with.
fantastic.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah. I think it'll be somewhere in France.
Well,
You know,
usually over here and in parts of Europe, if things are found, they end up in museums because that
yes,
is, as it were, a last resort. If they
sure,
don't end up there, then they're going to just
yes,
disappear and get lost forever, you know.
right,
But
right.
this
Yeah, they just
country,
want the world to see it. That's the thing. It's
that
been hidden
well,
a
that's
long time.
brilliant. That's fantastic. I
Yes,
mean,
yeah,
I did an exhibition for an expo a few weeks back of some of the things I've got here because
right.
I'm equally interested in getting artifacts out there
I
and
love it.
people seeing it.
Yes. No, I love it. I love it. I think it's fantastic, all the research that you're doing. I find if people are willing to take time, because really, this is like, how many years did you say it took to write Arthur? Like,
Arthur, I think I'm in the 44th year of Arthur.
okay, so that's 44 years that you're not going to get back.
No, it's not. I mean,
Just
the
that's a lot
biblical
of
one. The
dedication.
biblical one, I think, is that's probably coming up for 43 years now. I think I
Yes.
started Arthur in 1977, and I started the Bible one in 1978. So
Wow.
they're long, very long running. You know.
Yes. Yes.
But I've done another book. There's a book out there on Amazon called The Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood. That's done in the same format as the Arthur one, and that only took 4 years. So
Wow.
it just depends on the material, depends how much stuff is out there and how much,
Sure.
you need to
So
wade through.
Robin Hood, of course, was a real character.
I believe so. Yeah,
Right.
I
See, I
believe
love it.
he was.
I love it because this is stuff that people grow up with, probably
Yeah.
a bad version on Disney or something, but at least, you grow up and you think, oh, these were people. Are they?
Yeah.
Aren't they? I think that their story is worth telling
Yeah.
because there's so much misinformation out there. I know other people have written, on the topic of Arthur. There's quite a bit out there, but I don't think people can they can agree on some aspects,
Yeah.
but they can't agree on all aspects.
Well, all the books that I've written, because I think there's 4 of them at least, or 5 of them out there at the
Yeah.
moment now. All the books I've written, from experience, I've found that once you nail the truth, once you get down to the nitty gritty,
Mhm.
whatever's the oldest or the best or the most physical or whatever, when you get there,
Mhm.
that is usually more amazing and more fascinating than
Right.
any of the fiction. Once as it were, the plot starts to come together and you
Yes.
start to get those wow moments and the light bulb keeps going on and you think, oh, wow,
Right.
that makes sense. That makes sense. You
Right.
end up with something that is vastly better, much more exciting than any of the fiction, much
Right.
better.
Right. I agree. It's very exciting. We are basically at pretty much the top of the hour, so I have to
All right.
sign us off. So just
Okay.
hang tight, and I will get us all locked down here. So everybody, tonight, you guys are going to be able to get to watch this, and I know you're going to love it. So huge thank you to Mark Olly. My gosh, it's
Thanks
just
for having
been
me.
such a pleasure. This was just really, really informative, and it was really delightful. It's kind of like we're just hanging out,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
great. I love it. I love it. Big thank you to Folgers Coffee. Big thank you to Dr. Snick. Again, tonight we will be simultaneously airing across 8 different platforms. Chat rooms will be open. Amelia and I will be manning the fort, and you know the drill, guys. Just get on in there. And of course, Mark, you can go to any of these platforms I can make available
Yeah.
to you, and you can look at the comments, and we'll put them up. So if you're watching, you'll be able to see exactly, put some of it off until, next time, especially this part of it all, because we're going to be addressing it. So again, remember, people, support. Go ahead and either subscribe, like us up, follow, do whatever it takes if you like the content. We bring you the best, of course, as always. If you're looking for a specific guest or topic you'd like to see on the show, I know I've got a lot of emails coming in. I do get to everybody. It just takes me a bit of time because there's a lot. So the outerrealmcontact@gmail.com. That's the outerrealmcontact@gmail.com. Tune in tomorrow evening as we welcome back Nick Redfern to the show. And he's going to be talking about extraterrestrials and the Rh negative blood. Ooh, that sounds fun. But until then, y'all behave. We'll see you in chat this evening. Bye-bye.
Oh, there we go.